Back home here in Washington tonight, fast-moving developments on what may be the beginning of the end of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Question is, on whose terms? As President Trump just minutes ago laid out plans for a meeting with Vladimir Putin soon to negotiate that.
We're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia the first time. We'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done.
Saudi Arabia, the first meeting will happen.
I think so. We think we're going to probably meet in Saudi Arabia the first meeting.
And that's after President Trump had his first known phone call with Vladimir Putin today. Says he wants the negotiations to begin ASAP. In a conversation that the president described as highly productive, you see that Truth Social from President Trump there, with President Putin suggesting he would be willing to negotiate directly with the Ukrainian president. So, okay, what now? The world is looking ahead to Friday, when the vice president and secretary of state are set to meet with President Vladimir Zelenskyy in Munich. But what would the end of this war look like? Probably more like what Russia wants than Ukraine, based on the public comments so far, with President Trump and his new defense secretary saying today a return to Ukraine's borders before 2014, before Russia's annexation of Crimea, is unrealistic. Matt Bradley is joining us now. And I know we said it, fast-moving developments, no joke, right? I mean, up until like minutes ago, we've been hearing about this with President Trump and President Putin having their first known phone call. That's big news in and of itself, much less this discussion about what should happen to Ukraine moving forward. Not a member of NATO, if President Trump has his way. He made that clear today. And not with the borders that would be before Russia's annexation of Crimea, Matt. When you look at this war and so many people who have died from it.
That's right. I mean, there's a lot to look into, a lot to unpack about what just happened in the past couple of hours. The big thing, Hallie, and this has been commented on social media a lot, was that call with Putin came before the president's call with Zelenskyy. So the order is kind of important, too. According to the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, the call between Putin and Trump lasted an hour and a half. And it looks like Putin offered to host Trump in Moscow, which would be a pretty big deal if that came together. That would make this phone call look like nothing. I mean, there's the sanctions against Putin, and seeing the U.S. president going to visit him, if that happens, that would be a remarkable development. Now, Peskov also said that these upcoming negotiations would need to focus on the, quote, root causes of the conflict. And Hallie, I don't know if you watched Tucker Carlson's interview with Putin, but it was clear from that the Russian leader's views on the root causes of the conflict are many and various. Yeah. Many of those causes date to the Middle Ages, and it looks as though he kind of throws up whatever excuse he wants at any given time. So that would be a very, very difficult thing to unravel during these peace negotiations. And Trump's own readout of his call with Putin seemed to imply that he would simply be phoning up the Ukrainian president to inform him of what he had discussed with Zelensky's own archenemy, Vladimir Putin. And that sounds like that's more or less exactly what he did. Zelenskyy said after his call with Trump that nobody wants peace more than Ukraine. And he said that, as President Putin said, let's go for it. But it's clear from other comments today that you mentioned Ukraine is likely to be disappointed. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said today that the U.S. doesn't believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. He also cast out, as you mentioned, on returning to those pre-2014 borders before Ukraine was torn apart by Russia itself and by Russian supporters within Ukraine. And this strikes at another issue here that we heard coming from The Economist magazine's interview with Vladimir Zelenskyy, and that was in just the past few days. The Ukrainian president told The Economist that he's open to some sort of negotiation. He's very anxious about losing American support under this new President Trump. He's also worried, as we mentioned before, that these negotiations over his country's fate are happening in his absence, he's less being negotiated with, and he's more being negotiated over. Hallie?
Which makes this Friday meeting so critical between Vice President Vance, Secretary Rubio, President Zelenskyy as well. And it all dovetails with this question after we saw the dramatic images overnight of Mark Fogel, who'd been considered the American wrongfully detained in Russia, returning to U.S. soil. What did Russia get in exchange for that?
Yeah, well, remember, Hallie, that was our big question last night. What's going on here? What was the exchange? We have that answer now. Alexander Vinnik, he's a convicted money launderer. He'll be headed back to Russia after 8 years in prisons around the world, 2.5 of which were spent in the United States, according to a U.S. official who spoke to NBC News. He was arrested in a small Greek town in 2017 at the request of American authorities, but he's a wanted man around the world with extradition requests and charges coming from France, New Zealand, the U.S., and even some suspicions from Russia itself. So that original charge, which he initially denied, was that he had laundered $4 billion through Bitcoin on his own exchange, which was called BTCE. You remember Mt. Gox? So that was a cryptocurrency exchange that collapsed in 2014 after it was hacked. American officials believe Vinnick profited from that and that he laundered the proceeds. So say what you will about this exchange. This is a very big deal. This is a big fraudster and criminal. He's not a violent man. He was convicted of non-violent offenses, even though he spent time in prison really throughout the world.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.